Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. This morning we were to begin our summer worship as a church. Typically we would have a first Sunday lunch and we would have an 8:30 worship service, an adult forum, and then 11 o'clock worship, and then a first Sunday lunch. Our vision, because we had a chapel renovation that was slated to have begun last week, was that we were going to a first Sunday fellowship and then worship at 10:30. With the pandemic, we've had a change. We've had to have a change in how we are moving forward. So this morning we are having our first Sunday fellowship, and that fellowship is a time to share stories. And because the state of where we are, as a city, as a nation, complicated by a pandemic, I have invited Perre Magness this morning to help share her story. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to invite Perre to join us. So this week on Facebook, our member Bess Simpson posted that these words: "The image of the church and the Bible being used as props to promote anger and hostility left me stunned and heartsick." And in response to that Facebook post from Bess Simpson, Perre responded, "Like you, I am despairing. I see shades of 1968. But back then, Percy and I got involved in things and thought we were making the world, well, Memphis, better. Now I just feel old and helpless." Those were hard words for me to read, though they echoed with some words that I had heard another congregant speak, Adrienne Davis, as I visited her the week prior with some social distance. And so today what I have is I have Adrienne Davis by video sharing with us her story of living through 1967 and 1968 as a teacher at Jeter High School. And then we have Perre who will share her stories. So good morning. It is good to be with you. And let us pray. Lord, I am grateful before you today for the gift of what it means to be part of a larger community. At Idlewild, we will know that in worship this morning, as we collaborate, as Cattrall Rainey preaches, a new pastor at Parkway Gardens United Church. Lord, I am also grateful for the power of story in the ways that stories bind us together. And I'm also convicted that the church is being called to be something new. And I believe that that's something new. I'm hearing that calling to be something new coming out of charges like I heard this week when I heard another pastor say, "Get your knees off our necks." And so for that challenge to understand how the church has been complicit in systemic racism, for that challenge to understand how Christ's love transforms people, for that challenge to trust that God is in the midst of the city, I pray that you will guard us and you will guide us as we come together and listen together to our stories. It's in the name of Jesus Christ that I trust and pray. Amen. So go ahead.
My husband and I both grew up in small southern towns, in small southern Presbyterian churches. So when we married and moved to Memphis in 1965, there was no question that we would join a Presbyterian church. I have to say, we visited other churches, we were looking And I'm ashamed to say that the architecture of Idlewild probably had something to do with it. But we joined in 1955. Right after that, Bill Aldrich came as the new assistant minister. Bill and his wife Elizabeth were from even tinier towns in Mississippi Delta. But we became friends, and Bill had this idea, this crazy idea, that he wanted to start a coffee house as a church ministry. It was that he'd read about it in Are You Running With God or something like that, very radical idea. Anyway, we went to Nashville, the four of us, Bill and Elizabeth and Percy and I, to see where First Presbyterian Church, the old downtown Presbyterian Church, had started one. And then we came and we did it. And first we opened in the basement of Idlewild, one of the rooms in the Jones building. And we sort of thought it was going to be educated, college-educated young white people like us. And we were going to watch French movies, and that would be the coffee house. But it grew in popularity. More and more people came. And before long, we had enough people coming from different denominations, and we rented a place right opposite the old Crump Stadium on Cleveland. Now we enlisted four other midtown churches in this, so it was a partnership between the 5 churches: Grace St. Luke's, St. Mary's Episcopal, St. John's Methodist, and Madison Heights Methodist, which is no longer even there, and Idlewild. And so the 5 churches gathered upstairs and so forth, and we painted that old building. It was very shabby, and we painted it and so forth.
No, she's talking. It's history.
We opened, as I say, we were expecting people like us, but we were totally unprepared for who actually came, and came in large numbers. Runaways. We'd never heard of runaways, but that was early, mid-60s, and there were lots of runaways with no place to go. Rootless young people, and they came because it was free. Fellows from Millington came because they had no place to go. Drug addicts. We didn't know anything about drugs. We thought that was still the thing out on the West Coast. And sure enough, it was right here in Memphis. So what started as a ministry that we had envisioned turned into something that we were totally unprepared for. But we had to cope. We had a police and talk to us about drugs and how to recognize them. We were open on Friday and Saturday nights. And one night I smelled it, and I thought, I've got it. I smell it at last. And I followed my nose, and I thought, what am I going to say to this person? Where am I going to? And I followed my nose right to a Methodist. But we did have programs, and we felt like it was a ministry. And it was the Half and Half Coffee House attracted more and more people and more volunteers. And we continued. And then, of course, the garbage strike came in, I think, February of 1968, just after we got going. And the town was not shut down like the pandemic, but the whole town was very worried. And the garbage men started marching downtown. And that's when the famous I Am a Man sign began, which is now sort of a motto of Memphis. All they were asking for was some respect. They had no place to change their clothes after a smelly day. They wanted a raise, but mostly they wanted respect. Martin Luther King came to participate in one of the marches in March of that year. Henry Loeb was the mayor, and he absolutely refused to talk to any of the garbage men. And he said it was outside influences of union leaders from out of town, and to a certain extent that was true. There were union leaders here trying to help them organize. But Henry Loeb, the mayor, absolutely refused to listen to any demands or even to talk. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, 1968, labor strike is in full swing. Martin Luther King is preparing the Poor People's Campaign to go to Washington the next year. But he agreed finally to come back a second time to walk with the garbage trucks. Now, during this time, Bill Aldrich, Idlewild's assistant minister, was marching with the strikers. So were many other of all denominations. Then Martin Luther King was here for his second appearance. And while he stayed in the Lorraine Motel, he was supposed to go out that dinner before the next day and the march the next day at the Reverend Billy Kyle's house. And he was standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And what happened next is all too familiar to all of us. Well, panic set in. What's going to happen? Are there going to be riots? How could this have happened in Memphis? Who did this? Surely it wasn't a Memphian. And what's going to happen to our city? We love. Well, that we know that too. Except the story, the next day, the Ministerial Association was meeting at St. Mary's Cathedral. And Bill Aldrich of Idlewild helped write the document that they were going to present to Mayor Loeb. And they were going to march from St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral down on Poplar to City Hall, where it is now. Dean Dimmick, who was an older man, seized the cross off the altar and said, "I will lead it." They went to Loeb's office, and Rabbi Wax said, Henry Loeb is not a parishioner, a member of my congregation. And he tried to talk to him. But Mayor Loeb insisted that he would not talk. It was an illegal strike, and he could not countenance it, and he would not talk. Well, few people, eventually, and very quickly, the strike was settled. But few people at the time knew that what happened was Abe Plow, Mr. Anonymous, who had been giving so many charities in Memphis, paid the increased wages for the garbage men for the rest of that year. And that's what settled the strike. But after the strike was ended and Martin Luther King was dead, many other things happened in Memphis, and I just want to tell them about a few of them. A young white businessman, John T. Fisher, felt that he had to do something, so on Sunday afternoon, he organized something called Memphis Cares. He invited everyone to come to the old Crump Stadium, and seated on the platform as speakers were several black ministers and several white leaders and ministers. Percy and I went. We had to get a babysitter at that point for our very young child. We were sort of furtively looking around to see if we knew anybody else was there. Would anybody else have come that we knew? The meeting went on. Jim Lawson, one of the black ministers, said some things that white people didn't really want to hear. And that was a surprise to John T. and some of the other organizers. They were looking for a meeting about harmony. But just like today, Jim Lawson said some things that were hard for white people to hear. That was a turning point, sort of, in Memphis, I think. And a great many things followed, some of which Idlewild members had a lot to do with. MIFA was started, the Panel of American Women. Percy met with a bunch of young lawyers, and they started offering free legal services one night a week in the basement of Jim Lawson's church. That eventually became a government program called Legal Services that goes on today. The Concerned Women, the Breakfast Group, all sorts of things, efforts of white people to, the Fund for Needy School Children was started about a year later. That sent white volunteers from into black schools to tutor, to provide extras, to do whatever they could. And the Adopt-a-School program, Idlewild was paired with Pope School. I was working at Florida School. It was the first time black teachers had to do anything with white volunteers. And it was the first time that white volunteers had ever been to black school. That was just one of the many efforts. But I'm reminded so much of today when we hear doom and gloom and change is in the air. For white people, the change that was in the air in Memphis came about, but maybe it was just a way to comfort our consciences. And maybe some real change will happen today. I have to mention one other thing about Idlewild. The coffee house before all of this had become somewhat controversial because some people who lived in a very old apartment house on the block behind the coffee house protested and wrote letters to the different churches that awful people were hanging around on the street. You know, what were they doing there and so forth. Well, that letter came to the Idlewild session. And Bill and Percy all to speak before the session now. Remember that not only are there no women on the session, women were not even in session meetings at that time. So Elizabeth Aldrich and Betsy Mullins, who was a professor at Rhodes, who was a member of Idlewild and a volunteer at the coffee house, stood under the window. They met in the parlor and it was summertime and the window was open. We were trying to hear by listening below. And every so often we'd jump up to see if we could hear anything. Well, of course we couldn't. And if anybody had come by at that time, they would have wondered what on earth three crazy women were doing. But there was great discussion about the coffee house and was this really a ministry and so forth. And finally, as the discussion went on, old Mr. Hunter Lane said, well, are they sinners, these people that are coming? And Bill and Percy said yes. And Mr. Lane said, well, then let the boys have their coffee house. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And the coffee stayed. But Bill's marching with the protesters had attracted attention, and he left at the end of 1968. I never knew exactly who in Idlewild had complained, but apparently enough to make him feel uncomfortable, and he left. So that's the story of our first years in Idlewild. But the thing is, I've always been, one of the many reasons I've been thankful for Idlewild is back in the early 60s, in 1967, Idlewild had room for a strange thing started by a bunch of crazy young people that they called a ministry. And Idlewild had room under its big umbrella to let us do it. One final word. It ended in 1974. By that time, Percy and I had gone on to other things. But the coffee house closed. Many years later, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, we got a phone call, and it was from somebody I didn't know who said, the coffee house is having a reunion. Would you like to come on Sunday afternoon? And we said, oh, of course we would. We went to Alderman Park that Sunday afternoon. It was a bunch of middle-aged people. We didn't recognize any of them. But it warmed my heart to think that the coffee house had meant that much to so many people that they wanted to have a reunion that many years later. Thanks to Idlewild to begin it.
I'm wondering if anybody has any questions of Perry that you might ask her about these years, or maybe just having heard these stories. If you'd like to ask Perry, maybe could you tell me a little bit more about that? Or any reflections on what you're hearing, just about our sharing of stories right now in these days. I'm gonna invite that now. And I see from Peggy in the chat message that she's asked if you'll mute yourself unless you're talking because it gives feedback.
It's here.
It's here as well.
I have a question.
So Paige, go ahead.
Hi, Perry. Say a little about who really did come to the coffee house. You kept saying y'all were surprised with who came, but who came?
Well, we had a lot of volunteers from each of the 5 churches, and the ministers from those 5 churches came, the young ministers. I said, it was people who were younger than we were. We thought it would be sort of young married, but people college educated. They were much younger than we expected. And we did find runaways and people with drug problems and the sailors from Millington. There was a lot of younger people that we were not expecting to come, but we still thought it was a ministry. We thought we were doing something. The coffee house eventually gave rise to 2 other organizations. One was Runaway House that offered a place for runaways to come instead of being homeless on the street. Homeless people came. And Memphis House, which was the first drug treatment center in Memphis. And so those were 2 offshoots of the coffee house. Some people our age came out of curiosity. Let me just say one thing about some other things that this is about Idlewild. There were lots of things that happened after Martin Luther King's death. MIFA, of course, which you know from Julia Allen, out of some of the people, but many Idlewild people were involved in starting MIFA. You see how strong it's going today. One great thing was the porch. Outreach in Christian Help, I think. That was started by Lou McCaa, who was the DCE here. And that was, now you hear about this kind of thing all the time. It was a bunch of teenagers from all different churches who came to Idlewild and then spent a Saturday once a month doing things like painting somebody's house, delivering groceries, shopping for shut-ins, teenagers who were doing that. And there are all sorts of programs that do that now, but that really was the first. I said, the volunteers in Pope School. Daycare, Idlewild Daycare started at that time. The sports program had always been integrated, but some of these other things were. The Bethel Daycare Center, which I think that's located in the same place that is now a church, Liberation Church, that belonged to the Presbytery. But those were things that the Idlewild members were in response to the crisis.
I have a question about your memory about Reverend Lawson. You mentioned that he said things that made some white people uncomfortable. I'm wondering if you remember exactly what it was that he said.
What I remember is it's the same things that are being said today. You white people want to do these things like being paired with the school or volunteering for something, but you don't understand what we live with every day. And it was about, he was talking about, it wasn't just for garbage workers, it was Black people having to face these problems every day. And that
systemic
made white
racism.
people uncomfortable. Think about how you're feeling today. It's making us uncomfortable right now.
Thank you.
Hi, Perry. Thank you for sharing those stories. I have more of a comment than a question, and I think back on these stories, which I've heard you tell our class before, and it reminds me of what Idlewild's DNA is. Anne prayed at the beginning of our reflections here that the church is called to something new. That's in Idlewild's DNA. And it's in the history of Idlewild. It's in the present of Idlewild through actions such as MICA, through engagement on issues such as Black Lives Matter and others. But I also think it's the future of Idlewild. It's who we are as a people. So I hear these stories about where we've been, and it reminds me of who we are. So thank you for sharing those, Perry.
Thank you. I like to think that it is in Idlewild's future. Anything else? Dr. Jones had already, the Memphis Council on Human Relations was started back in the 50s. And Dr. Jones had been a charter member of that, along with Rabbi Wax and many other ministers. But he always said that marching was not his style. So when the marches began, Dr. Jones preached in his gentle way. He was leading Idlewild toward more activity, but Bill was the one who marched and paid for it by leaving the church. So Dr. Jones had been a quiet leader all those years, but some of us need to be loud once again.
I'm wondering if anybody on this call has stories. I see some of you maybe might have some stories from living in Memphis during that period of time. You might not have been a part of Idlewild, but I wonder if you have any stories to share.
This is Peggy McClure. The story I have to share is my Aunt Natalie Manier and her husband Jim happened to have Ham and Catherine Smythe, the owners of the Yellow Cab Company, over at their house for dinner that night. And when the word got out, the first thing that Ham Smythe did was to call the office and tell the dispatchers that any household help who wanted to get home quickly could go at no cost. And that was a good reaction. And in spite of the fact that Uncle Jim was trying to get Henry Loeb to change his mind about how he was handling things, because he was the, what do you say, Perry? He was the, what was his role? He was the general counsel for the mayor, basically.
Yeah, okay, was he the district attorney for the city?
Yeah, something like that.
And I remember what Ham, I do remember that. That's, yeah, that kind of thing happened. Other people probably know more.
And I also remember just as a child, because I was just really little when it happened. My parents were really pretty good about not having the television on for us to get nervous about this. But it really made me mad that I couldn't stand play hide and seek after the streetlights went on because of the curfews. And that was the level of my understanding, which I am so grateful that that's the part that I remember. I only learned about Aunt Natalie and Uncle Jim much later, when I was able to emotionally handle it.
A lot of things were going on before the strike. That just brought everything to a head. Was one thing that happened afterwards was the minister of Parkway Gardens, who was black, Zeke Bell, was invited to come and pray at one of the Holy Weeks. And, you know, a black minister praying in the church at Idlewild, that seems like that should be a no-brainer. But in 1968, I don't know if people at the church quit coming. You know, when things get tough, a lot of people run. And that's happened with all the naughty decisions that the church has made.
Naughty, complicit.
Naughty, K-N-O-T-T-Y, naughty decisions, not naughty.
It's kind of fun to sit next to Perry and ask for clarification in that way. Charles Key, I'm wondering if you might speak a little bit. Sarah posted in an adult formation kind of a reflection about Trinity Sunday on Friday that came out. But in that was an invitation to the congregation to read and to reflect and to pray over a 10-week period, with an invitation to really look at what our complicity as the church has been, not just the church, but that we might really look at systemic racism with some intention in the fall. So I wonder if you might just give us a bigger picture of what that adult formation picture looks like. The invitation, that we might share it with the communities that we're a part of at Idlewild.
Yeah, this is something that's happening as we speak. We're all thinking, praying, looking forward to how we approach the subject. And as Perry said, it's uncomfortable. It's difficult. I happen to have just finished a book that I got from Presbyterian Publishing called Good White Racist ? It's very much a challenge to us to recognize the ways in which we failed to initially to recognize racism in ourselves. It's latent, it's quiet to us, but these times are drawing that out. And turns out there's a lot of literature out there. There was an amazing New York Times piece recently by Ibrahim Kenda, who listed 24 books that he suggested were the catalysts for what we are now. And then that wonderful list that was just distributed, there's a lot of material, and we hope to dig into some of that together as early as, or at least by fall.
And you know, that's really good. And there are an awful lot of things to read. But I saw on Facebook, it might have been Kenda who said it, that reading and books and talking about our favorite one is another way to assuage our consciences without doing anything.
I think I'm sitting with a prophet.
Guilt is one of my better emotions.
And I've also thought a lot lately, more all the time, in fact, and this has just brought it to my direct attention. We've tried so hard, we think we've tried to be welcoming to all people. And yet our guest a couple of weeks ago, in her response to the question about congregations who are more successful with this, it said we suggested in her remarks that we failed to make a comfortable place for people of color. In spite of our efforts, we just haven't recognized what's really needed there. And I think we're going to be looking at that again together in the near future.
All right, to really name us, if you are old enough, you remember the Second Presbyterian Church refusing to seat the Black students from Lemoyne and Southwestern who tried to come. They were visiting churches all over town. It was called kneel-ins. And second pres refused to seat them by having the elders stand at the door with their arms and then with security guards. Well, second pres now has a black minister on the staff, and one of the music directors is black. And I don't know how many ministers they have, but I think they have more than we do. How many members I meant?
And this is Mary Lou.
Thank you, Mary Lou.
I wasn't in Memphis during that time. I was in Louisiana, which is kind of another step in deep South thinking, I think. But what I wanted to say in relation to what Charles was saying and the work that's going on right now, one of my irritations for many years has been that when we approach this subject, it's always white people talking to other white people about and making our assumptions about what we think Black people think. And it always irritates me, I'm not talking about Idlewild now, but just in church in general, when we have classes and discussions and there are no African-American people there to talk about it. On the other hand, when we talk about other religious understandings, we always invite other people from those churches or those religious groups to come in and talk with us. But when it comes to race, we just talk to each other and perpetuate in my opinion, the misunderstandings that we have. So that would be something I would encourage the Charles and his group to be thinking of, is how do we listen and get it from the horse's mouth rather than our own understandings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I appreciate the challenge. And Charles, welcome to being the muck of adult formation.
Thank you.
Christian formation, I should say.
Yeah, there are a couple things that the reading that we've done recently has brought to light. One, certainly if you invite a speaker and a speaker comes willingly, great. And certainly some of the sources that we are using, some of the podcasts, some of the videos, as well as some of the written things, are by thoughtful Black people speaking to us as white people. That's one way of communication, of course, not what Mary Lou's talking about, where you actually have a dialogue, which is ideal. But one of the comments I've gotten back about that, or one of the responses that some speakers have given, is speaking as a Black person is not my responsibility to educate you. It's not my responsibility to explain these things to you. So, I don't know how we get there without that, but certainly the live dialogue would be a really helpful thing. We can arrange that as well. I'm sure there'll be opportunity for that.
Yeah, Charles, I think you've hit on something that I've talked about with Sarah, which is the balance between, the desire for thoughtful and engaging and respectful and honest dialogue, but without asking Black people to do the work for us, and without asking them to be the ones to, teach us and, take the burden off of us. And I think finding a place where we can be in dialogue, but without asking, people of color to do our own work is a challenge. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think that's a goal worth seeking.
It certainly is.
So Perry, I wonder, I am the mother of a child who's graduating from high school this year. So she was born into a 9/11 world. She's I don't even know if you call it graduating, but she's graduating in a pandemic and in this world that is at unrest. And I wonder and she's a confirmed and baptized member of this body here. I wonder what advice you might offer to her as she moves out into the world. And for those of us who are parenting even younger children and raising children in the church, you have a long trajectory in the church. So I'm curious about, what's your encouragement for her and for us?
You're throwing me when I wasn't prepared for it. A couple of things. Meeting people on an equal plane. I joined the panel of American women whose purpose was to talk about prejudice. And on every panel, we gave panels to churches and civic programs and clubs and stuff. That would hear us. On every panel, there was a Protestant, a Catholic, a Jew, a white person, and a black person. And we met with each other and talked to each other. And it was the first time I had black friends who were certainly my education level, not just someone who came to clean my house. And that kind of thing. But also, I think about the kids who joined Torch, that may be some of you. Well, but doing mutual work, doing something that you feel is that black and white people agree on, to do something. You all are so right about pick one person and make them be the token to tell us what we need to hear. We need to be out there doing some kind of work. The people who've worked at Idlewild School, for instance, over the years, the people who MIFA has served, people at Church Health who are doing so much. There are all sorts of places where this happens. Young people, they know a lot that we don't know. They've been born into such a totally different world. We don't know what they know. Maybe we need to listen to them for a while, find out what they want, instead of our just telling them, oh, this is how we think you should make a black friend. I'll have to think on that a lot more.
Barb just pointed out to me, she's here with me, she's sitting over there, I can't see her, that we're certainly not saying that reading to educate ourselves is not a good thing. It's a good thing, but that alone is not good. That we need to take action. And so we need to prepare ourselves, maybe by reading, by listening, but then we need to act. I think that's what we're really all realizing through this, is that we need to take what we can learn and then we need to act to improve things.
Yes, good.
I think to Jeremy's point, when I think about Idlewild Church specifically, and we've been in a season of transition. When Steve was retiring after 18 years, that seemed like a pretty big transition. And then when Rebecca left, and then when Margaret left, that seemed like an even bigger transition. And then, it seemed like we were in this huge transition. Oh, and then a pandemic came. And I really have a heart in my heart. I discern that our church is being readied for something new. And I wonder if it is that we're going to be called to a new action. Not that I understand what that action is, or that I have discerned, or that we have discerned it. I think that's something we do together. When I think about the ministry that Sarah brought us to reflect over the course of a year liturgically about immigration, to no longer be strangers and what that meant. And that discernment process literally that group that went to the border, they came back. They did not really have an opportunity. We didn't have an opportunity to do that discernment together as a congregation because of the pandemic. But I feel like I sense, I prayerfully am discerning there is something new that we're going to be called to. And I wonder if it is some yet undefined, but becoming more clear. Our parking lot on Wednesdays, it is a ministry that is novel. I don't think that's it, but I see need in new ways. And so I'm curious about how this will all come together. Mary Lou, you want to share what you shared in the chat?
Well, I just said that Micah, and I was listening to and I think people get Micah and Micah confused, and that's unfortunate that the names are so similar. But my working in that organization or participating in that organization has been the first time in my life that I have worked side by side with African American people without anyone, and it's happened without anyone constructing it in the sense of, okay, we have to have this many Black people and this many white people or whatever. It's just been whoever could do the job best, drawing from 64 different churches in Memphis. And that's probably the most impressive thing that has happened for me is I find myself going sometime and sitting there really in awe that that we have this, first of all, that we have this opportunity to do it, and second, watching how easily it's happening, because there's an acceptance on both sides that we're working toward a goal.
Together too.
Yes, so anyway, I just point out that I would like to see Idlewild become more, I'm going to use the word supportive of Micah. I know we were an original member. I know we pay our dues. I know we have a group of us that participate, but we could go further. And so that would be something I would like to see the church explore. But it would be uncomfortable for some people in our church because Micah is dealing very directly with specific issues, not just general feel good. And so we don't always agree on the direction that the city should, how the city should go. Anyway, that was what I was referring to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Melissa Peeler, you're on this call. I'm wondering if you could address, just if somebody wanted to, how do you get involved in Micah? Where's the best place to engage? Melissa, you might be muted. Okay, I'm not sure that Melissa is with us. Mary Lou, would you just tell us a little bit about where you stepped into Micah, how you got engaged?
Well, it was through hearing about it, through the announcements made in our church when Idlewild became a participating member. And so we have a core group of people. There are about a dozen of us who are actively involved. If someone wanted to do that, I would say that the easiest thing would be first to talk to one of us who are actively involved in it, and that list could be published in the church information sources. But then every month, Micah meets twice. The first time is what they call a board meeting, but it's open to everyone, and they discuss what projects are going on. And then the second, 2 weeks later, the second meeting is called Issues Night. And of course, all this now is happening by Zoom. And the individual task groups meet and discuss what their next efforts are going to be. And let me just give you 2 examples so you'll know we're talking about concrete stuff here. Just this week, if you were scanning the news in whatever way you receive it, you might have seen that Mayor Harris announced that the testing of every single incarcerated person in Shelby County had begun. And if you read really carefully, you would have seen that he gave credit to Micah for being what he said, Micah nudged me to do this sooner than I would have. And so Micah deals directly with the top levels of whatever, whether it's government or business or community leadership. And we've been trained in doing this. So there is training that happens on how to do this. In my case, I've been, as many of you know, very involved with MATA and trying to get more funding for MATA. And so we have met with all of the county commissioners and Mayor Harris multiple times and so forth. And the result was that for the very first time ever, the county put its toe in the water to help fund MATA with $2.5 million. And the most significant thing is that when they've been meeting to try to trim the budget, they have not cut that funding of MATA, which they easily could do. So I guess my point is we're dealing with very concrete issues that have a direct impact on the community. It's not esoteric.
No, I'm very aware of Micah, and I think that's great. You're absolutely right. You're doing something.
So I wonder if we're coming to the end of our time. I'm wondering if anybody else has anything to share before, I'm realizing I'm out of screen. If you have anything to share before we need to close our time together or would like to share.
And if you can look at your chat, Melissa offered 3 names. I can't look at mine right now. And she apologized. She has no microphone on her device she's listening from. But
Yeah.
she mentioned her husband, Michael. Who else?
Bruce Weber, Michael Peeler, Elizabeth Doolin, Stephen McIntosh, all these folks you can ask about Micah if you're looking for a way to get involved with Micah. Our preacher's coming in. Good morning. Good morning. I'm fine. Excuse me while I do business here right now.
And I would like to offer too, before we close, something you mentioned just a moment ago brought to mind a passage from the scripture. And so often the scripture we have to reach back. We have to put ourselves in the context. And then other times it sounds like it was written yesterday. Okay. And familiar verse from James 1 verse 2, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing.
And on that note, I would like just to say thank you to Perry. I'm realizing that I did not get to play Adrienne Davis's story, so I will find a way to share that with this group, which tells the story of her being at Jeter High School, and really the power of relationships in a tough time in the city. Yes, joy, Charles, even in the trials and the tribulations. But thank you, Perry, for joining us today, and thank you for your stories. And I hope you'll continue to tell them, because you helped to shape the church.
Thank you, Perry. Good to see you.
What you and Percy did was not, it was important, and it still is important. It was important for us to hear these stories today. So thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, listening. I think that is one of the actions we're being called into as the church. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon us and give us peace. Amen.
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 Thank you, Perry.
Sunday school.